My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 35 years old, and for 15 years, I helped build the company my father liked, telling everyone he built alone. Then, one Thursday evening, he ended our relationship with 7 words. Don't bother coming. We're cutting ties. No conversation. No warning. Just a voicemail. I texted back one word. Understood. Then I quietly removed myself from the business loan they thought I would keep guaranteeing. 36 hours later, my phone looked like someone had declared a family emergency. 78 missed calls from my mother alone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My father started Carter Industrial Supply out of a storage unit in Houston in the late 80s. By the time everything fell apart, the company was pulling roughly $4.2 million a year from a 50,000 square foot facility in North Dallas. Dad loved telling the story. One man, one dream. Nothing but hard work. He usually forgot the $80,000 my grandfather loaned him and never asked him to repay. Adjusted for inflation, it was close to receiving $200 0 startup capital for free, but that detail didn't fit Dad's mythology. We supplied industrial equipment to oil fields, construction companies, manufacturing plants, high-end generators, hydraulic systems, specialized fabrication equipment. Not glamorous, but profitable, and complicated. I started there during high school summers. While my friends were going to pools and taking road trips, I was counting inventory in warehouses that regularly crossed 100 degrees. After college, I moved into operations. 4 years before everything collapsed, I rebuilt most of our back-end infrastructure. Inventory tracking, vendor coordination, client-specific ordering systems, credit procedures, shipping schedules. I knew that business, the way some people know the rooms in their childhood home. Then there was my younger sister Danielle. Danielle was 27 and had lived an entirely different childhood despite growing up under the same roof. Small. Apartment paid by mom and dad. Car paid by mom and dad. Trips through Europe disguised as networking. When she wrecked her convertible BMW sophomore year, Dad was furious for approximately 12 hours. Mom changed his mind. She needs reliable transportation for networking events, she insisted. A replacement BMW appeared within the week. At the time, I was driving a 10-year-old Camry with almost 1,800,000 miles on it. I'd bought it myself. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Families rarely reveal their hierarchy through one dramatic announcement. They reveal it through hundreds of little decisions. Who gets forgiven? Who gets rescued? Who gets expected to survive without help? Danielle majored in communications. Her professional experience before joining Carter Industrial consisted mainly of a summer internship at a marketing firm run by her college roommate's father. Dad hired her anyway. Vice President. Salus. No probationary period. No starting at the bottom. I had needed years to earn authority Danielle received with a business card. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself the company mattered more than my pride. That lie cost me more than I understood at the time. The first time Danielle showed me exactly who she was happened during a major oil company contract. I had spent 6 months designing the logistics for it. I built a custom inventory workflow around the client's requirements. I worked until 3 in the morning, more times than I could count. Weekends disappeared. My boyfriend at the time, Marcus, finally reached his limit. One Sunday evening, he stood in my apartment while I answered another work email. Evaine, 1 second. That's what you said 20 minutes ago. I looked up. His overnight bag was beside him. Something inside me sank. Marcus, I'm competing with a company, he said quietly. And I'm losing. He wasn't cruel about it. That somehow made it worse. He kissed my forehead and left. The following morning I went to work at 7. Because that's what I did. 6 weeks later came the final presentation for the oil company procurement team. Danielle arrived 20 minutes late. She walked into the conference room, took the presentation remote from beside my laptop, smiled at everyone and introduced herself as the architect of the partnership. I remember staring at her. Not because I was shocked, because nobody else seemed to be. Then a procurement executive asked about implementation timelines. Danielle froze. Well, our systems are extremely flexible. They're asking about the phased warehouse rollout, I said. I explained it. 3 distribution stages, contingency, inventory, emergency delivery procedures. The client nodded. Danielle smiled until the meeting ended. Then she cornered me in the warehouse. Don't ever make me look stupid in front of a client again. I stared at her. You didn't know the answer. Then write it down and pass it to me. Danielle, I'm the face of sales now. Your back end. She stepped closer. Know your place. I should have quit that afternoon. Instead, I swallowed it. The contract generated approximately $1.7 million during its first year. Danielle's name appeared on the commission paperwork. Mine didn't. And Dad, he knew. That was the part I refused to admit for years. Last year, I finally found proof Danielle was inflating her commission numbers. Automatic renewals became new sales. Deals closed by other representatives somehow appeared under her name. Even phantom leads seemed to magically convert whenever Danielle needed to hit a quarterly target. I spent a week building a comparison spreadsheet. Then I brought it to Dad. He barely looked at it. That's how business gets done in Texas. I remember sitting across from him wondering whether he genuinely believed that or simply didn't want to know. Either way, I started documenting things, quietly. Invoices, access records, commission reports, financial inconsistencies. I wasn't planning revenge. Something simply told me to keep receipts. Then came Thursday. 4:42 p.m. I just closed our biggest deal of the quarter when I noticed Dad's missed call. I played the voicemail while packing my laptop. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. My hand stopped on the zipper. That was it. 7 words. Our family reunion happened every year at Dad's ranch in the hill country. But it wasn't merely barbecue and family photos. That weekend was when Dad discussed next year's business direction. Compensation, leadership, expansion. Being excluded meant something much bigger than missing dinner. I walked toward my office window. Across the hall, through the glass wall of Dad's office, I could see him sitting beside Danielle. Documents were spread across his desk. Danielle pointed at something. Dad nodded. Suddenly, everything made sense. They weren't planning the next quarter. They were planning life after me. I picked up my phone. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Finally, understood. Sent. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was the leather-bound corporate ledger connected to the restructuring we'd completed 4 years earlier. My signature sat beside my parents' signatures. For years, that signature had meant responsibility. That night it looked like a chain. I photographed the relevant documents and emailed my attorney. Family business situation changing. Need to discuss separation and liability tomorrow. Then I locked my office and walked away. The following morning, I canceled my flight to the hill country. I formally requested a financial audit. And most importantly, after consulting counsel, I began the process of removing myself as guarantor from business credit obligations, wherever I was legally entitled to withdraw. It wasn't revenge. It was risk management. Dad had taught me that himself. Business is business. An hour later, Danielle texted, "Always knew you'd bail when things got tough." Another message followed. "Don't worry. I've got plenty of ideas for fixing your outdated systems." Then, "Bet Dad wishes he'd put me in charge years ago." I took screenshots. No response. The next morning, Matthew, one of our longtime warehouse managers, texted me. "Your dad just held an emergency meeting." A second message appeared. "Danielle has your position effective immediately." Then, "We're screwed." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Apparently, Danielle had spent months telling Dad that I planned to start a competing company and steal clients. It was absurd. But Dad believed what he wanted to believe. So I continued documenting my exit. Then, 36 hours later, my phone started vibrating. And didn't stop. Mom, Dad, Aaron, my younger brother, the accountant, unknown numbers, email notifications piled up. I finally opened Dad's first voicemail. "Evelyn, you need to call me about the credit line paperwork. It's important." The second sounded less controlled. "Sweetheart, whatever you're doing, we can discuss this like adults. Call me." Then the third. "Evelyn, this isn't a game. The company is at stake. I sat silently at my kitchen table. Then the accountant called. His message lasted 11 seconds. Evelyn, call me immediately. The bank is reviewing the credit facility. Your withdrawal and signature situation have created a serious problem. I leaned back. For 15 years, my family had treated my reliability like background noise. Something permanent. Something they didn't have to appreciate because it would always be there. Dad thought he had replaced me overnight. Danielle thought she'd inherited a throne. Neither of them understood what they'd actually inherited. Because removing me from my title was easy. Removing 15 years of responsibility guarantees institutional knowledge, vendor, trust, and operational infrastructure was something else entirely. And judging by the panic filling my voicemail, they were beginning to understand the difference. By the third day, the calls had stopped sounding angry. They sounded afraid. Mom left voicemails so quickly that half her words blurred together. Evelyn, honey, whatever happened between you and your father, please don't do anything drastic. Danielle says the bank is misunderstanding something. Your father hasn't slept. Please just call us. I didn't. Aaron tried a different approach. Ev, I have no idea what's happening, but this family is losing its mind. Call me when you're ready. I stared at his message, longer than the others. Aaron was 32, 3 years younger than me, and 5 years older than Danielle. He had spent most of his life learning how to stand in the middle of family arguments without getting crushed by either side. He wasn't perfect. But, unlike my parents, he had never pretended Danielle could do no wrong. Still, I wasn't ready to involve him. Then on the 4th morning, the bank sent me something that changed everything. I was drinking coffee at my apartment when the email appeared. Action required. Ownership authorization review. I opened it. At first, I thought it concerned my request to separate myself from the company. Then, I saw the transaction documents. Dad and Danielle had attempted to transfer a substantial amount of company money into another account controlled exclusively by them. That wasn't all. There was preliminary paperwork involving a restructuring of the original LLC that would effectively remove my remaining financial interest and authority. I read the documents twice. Then, a third time. My coffee went cold beside me. They weren't simply replacing me. They were trying to erase me. The only reason the transactions hadn't gone through cleanly was an operating agreement we'd adopted 4 years earlier during the company's restructuring. An agreement I had pushed for. Dad had complained about it at the time. Too much corporate nonsense, he'd said. But I insisted. Transfers above $50,000 required unanimous member authorization. Major ownership changes required signatures from all relevant members. Dad had apparently forgotten. Or maybe Danielle convinced him rules were something other people had to follow. I called my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Tell me you saw the bank email. I'm looking at it. There was a pause. This changes things, Evelyn. I know. No, I mean, legally. His voice hardened. If these documents are accurate, they attempted significant financial changes without required authorization. We need to preserve everything. I looked through the attachments again. How bad? Potentially very bad. I closed my eyes. Until that moment, some small part of me had still wondered whether I'd overreacted. Maybe Dad had been angry. Maybe Danielle had manipulated him. Maybe the voicemail had been some impulsive family punishment that spiraled out of control. That email killed the last of those excuses. Do what you need to do, I said. Are you sure? Yes. After we hung up, I opened the folders I'd been building for months. Danielle's commission reports. Questionable vendor payments. Personal expenses categorized as business costs. Consulting invoices connected to relatives. Cash transactions that didn't match our official records. I had always told myself I was documenting irregularities because that was what a responsible operations executive did. Now those records felt like ammunition. My lawyer filed the necessary complaints with the bank and requested restrictions on disputed company accounts pending review. We also demanded a formal audit. Then I started calling people, not to sabotage the company, to protect myself. I confirmed my separation from credit obligations wherever legally possible. I moved my personal banking away from institutions connected to Carter Industrial. I documented company access I had previously possessed and stopped using systems I was no longer authorized to control. I wanted a clean line between Evelyn Carter, the individual, and Carter Industrial Supply. Because if the ship was sinking, I wasn't letting Dad chain me to the deck. That afternoon, Matthew texted, "You won't believe this." I replied, "Try me." 3 dots appeared. Danielle tried changing inventory permissions. Then, server crashed. I stared at the message. How bad? Orders aren't sinking. Warehouse has no reliable pick list. Your dad has been screaming for 2 hours. I almost laughed. Almost. When I'd modernized our systems, I'd documented everything. Danielle could have learned them if she'd ever bothered. But she'd spent 4 years calling what I built back-end stuff. Now the back-end stuff wasn't working. And suddenly, everyone cared. The following afternoon, Aaron called again. This time I answered. "Evain, I'm here." He exhaled. "Thank God. What do you want, Aaron?" "I want to know why Dad is talking about losing the company." "Ask Dad." I did. "And?" "He said you're trying to destroy him." I laughed once. No humor in it. "Of course he did. Danielle says you're freezing money because you're jealous she got promoted." That one actually made me smile. "Meet me tomorrow." "Where?" I named a barbecue place in North Dallas. "Just you." "I'll be there." Aaron was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked exhausted. "Dad's losing it," he said before I'd even sat down. "Mom's barely sleeping. Danielle keeps threatening to sue you." "She probably will." "Evelyn." "What the hell happened?" I placed a thin folder on the table. "They tried to cut me out, financially." Aaron frowned. "Dad already cut you out." "No. I mean completely." I pushed the folder toward him. "Read." He opened it. The first pages were bank notices, then transfer requests, then emails between Dad, Danielle, and the accountant discussing how quickly the restructuring could be completed. Aaron's expression changed gradually. Confusion, disbelief, then concern. "What is this? What does it look like?" He tapped one page. $75,000. "Keep reading." His eyes moved down the page. "Where did it go?" "That's one of the questions the audit is supposed to answer." Aaron flipped to another statement. I leaned forward. "I found another transfer for $150,000, marked as business development." "To where?" "A private account connected to Dad and Danielle." Aaron looked up. "No." "Yes. There has to be an explanation. Then they can explain it to the bank." He lowered his voice. "Do you realize what this could do to them?" I stared at him. "Do you realize what it could have done to me?" He went silent. "My name was tied to company debt, Aaron. My signature was on financial agreements. If they moved money, created liabilities, and left me attached to the obligations, I could have spent years cleaning up their mess." He closed the folder. "Dad wouldn't deliberately do that to you." I almost admired how badly he wanted to believe it. "What about Danielle?" That silenced him. Years earlier, Danielle had taken money meant for one of Aaron's professional programs after promising she'd repay it within a month. She never did. Dad covered the shortage. Nobody discussed it again. "Exactly," I said. Aaron rubbed both hands over his face. "You need to talk to them." I already communicated with Dad. A voicemail isn't a conversation. Tell him that. Aaron winced. "Just don't destroy everything." "I'm not destroying anything. Mom is already talking about selling the house." That landed harder than I wanted it to. But I kept my voice steady. "I didn't move the money." "I know. I didn't cut myself out." "I know. I didn't give Danielle my job." "I know." "Then stop asking me to protect them from decisions they made." Aaron looked down at the folder. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally he said, "I just don't want to lose my family." I understood that. Because neither did I. But apparently, I'd been the only one expected to pay whatever price was necessary to keep it. That evening, the bank confirmed restrictions had been placed on disputed company funds pending review. Then, the preliminary findings arrived. More than $250, 0 inches questionable transactions. Additional transfers still awaiting clarification. By the following morning, the review had expanded. Hundreds of thousands in company assets were restricted, while investigators examined months of withdrawals. The consequences were immediate. Vendors wanted payment. Payroll became uncertain. The company's revolving credit facility was under scrutiny. Carter Industrial had relied on cash flow the way a body relies on blood. Now, someone had clamped an artery. Dad left 3 voicemails overnight. The first was furious. The second was threatening. The third was pleading. Evelyn, sweetheart, call me. Whatever you think happened, we can fix it. Funny. A week earlier, there had been nothing to fix. They had Danielle. Aaron called again. Meet them tonight. No. Please. Aaron. One last time. For me, I closed my eyes. He had stayed out of this for years. I owed him one conversation. One meeting. Thank you. But if Dad threatens me, or Danielle starts lying, I leave. Fair. That night I drove to my parents' house in North Dallas. The place looked exactly as I remembered it. Same limestone exterior. Same massive oak near the driveway. Same dining room window. Where I'd once stood waiting for Marcus to pick me up for our first anniversary dinner. Mom opened the door. She hugged me immediately. You look tired. So do you. Dad was standing in the living room, with his arms crossed. Danielle sat in his leather chair. I almost laughed at the symbolism. Sit down, Dad said. Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Sit down. I took the chair opposite him. On the wall behind Danielle were family photographs. Graduations. Birthdays. Christmases. Danielle somehow occupied the center of almost every picture. I wondered if it had always been that obvious. Dad started. What the hell do you think you're doing? I could ask you the same thing. You froze company money. The bank restricted disputed funds after unauthorized transactions were reported. You're destroying everything I built. I felt something inside me snap. Everything you built? His face reddened. You know what I mean. No, Dad. Explain it. Danielle stood. Oh, please. You've always hated that Dad trusts me. I turned toward her. He trusted you with my position before you knew how to operate the inventory system. Her jaw tightened. I don't need your outdated system. You crashed it. Her face changed, just slightly. Enough. Dad stepped between us. Danielle has relationships with new clients. She's bringing the company into the future. Then why do you need me? Silence. I looked directly at him. You cut ties with me. Remember, that's family business. You made it company business when you replaced me the next morning. Danielle folded her arms. Don't worry, Dad. Once this ridiculous freeze is lifted, I'll bring in Oracle. I have contacts. We'll replace Evelyn's homemade system with an actual enterprise platform. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You've never even logged into the administrative console. I don't need to. That's what consultants are for. There it was. Danielle's solution to everything. Spend enough money until competence became somebody else's responsibility. Then, I looked at Dad. For the first time in my life, I saw what lived underneath his anger. Fear. He knew. Maybe not everything, but somewhere inside him he knew Danielle couldn't replace me. And admitting that now would mean admitting he'd chosen wrong. So he doubled down. You want to play hardball, he said quietly. Fine. You want to burn this family down, I'll show you what that really looks like. Auden stood. Dad, stop. I rose and picked up my jacket. I came because Aaron asked me to. Mom stepped forward. Evelyn, please. I looked at her. For 1 second, I wanted her to say what she'd never said when we were children. You're right. Instead, she whispered. Can't you just fix this? Of course. Even now. Danielle could break it. Dad could authorize it. Mom could excuse it. And Evelyn would fix it. No, I said. Then I walked out. I had barely reached my car when my phone buzzed. An email from my lawyer. I opened it beneath the driveway light. My father, mother, and Danielle had filed suit against me. Corporate sabotage. Improper interference with company accounts. Misappropriation of company information. Financial damages. I read the accusations twice. Then I looked back at the house. Through the living room window, I could see Dad standing beside Danielle. They had spent 15 years teaching me to document everything, to anticipate failure, to protect the company, to never walk into negotiations without leverage. And now they'd filed a lawsuit that would give my lawyer the right to start asking questions under oath. Questions about the transfers, the commissions, the accounts, the missing money. I let out a quiet laugh. They thought they had just escalated the war. What they had actually done was open the door I'd been waiting for. Because if they wanted discovery, I was going to let them discover everything. The lawsuit hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Not because I thought Dad and Danielle were right. They weren't. But ridiculous accusations can still ruin your life if they're wrapped in enough legal paperwork. They accused me of everything from corporate sabotage to misappropriating company information. According to their filing, I was a bitter former executive who had deliberately interfered with company finances after being removed from management. Danielle apparently wanted damages. A lot of them. My lawyer read the complaint twice before looking across his desk at me. They've made a mistake. That sounds reassuring. I'm serious, Evelyn. By filing this, they've opened themselves to discovery. I already knew what that meant. Bank statements, emails, internal communications, accounting records, potential depositions. Every door Dad had spent years keeping closed could now be forced open. But don't underestimate them, my lawyer continued. Their claims don't have to be true to become expensive. That part worried me. For the next week, my life became legal documents, conference calls, bank records, and sleepless nights. My phone barely left my hand. Every time an email notification appeared, my stomach tightened. The worst part wasn't even Dad. It was Aaron. They had named him as a potential witness. When he called me, his voice sounded defeated. They're trying to make me choose. You don't have to. Dad says if I don't support them, I'm supporting you. I closed my eyes. That sounds like Dad. I hate this. So do I. There was silence. Then Aaron whispered, I saw more of the documents. My eyes opened. What documents? The accountant was at the house yesterday. He and Dad were arguing in the study. Danielle started yelling about records that should have been deleted. Something cold moved through me. Deleted. That's what she said. Before I could ask more, Aaron lowered his voice. Ev, I think there's more going on than what you showed me. There was. I just didn't know how much more. 2 days before our first court appearance, I received a message from the last person I expected. Dad's accountant. We need to meet privately. There are things you need to know. I stared at it for almost a minute. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. His response came immediately. Meet him somewhere public. Don't promise anything. Let him talk. That night, I drove to a roadhouse off Interstate 35. The accountant was already sitting in a back booth. He was a humorless man from Austin I'd never particularly liked. He'd worked with Dad for years and always treated questions like personal insults. That night, he looked 10 years older. He kept checking the entrance. Evain. I sat opposite him. You wanted to talk. He adjusted his glasses. I shouldn't be here. Then leave. No. His hand tightened around his water glass. I can't. For the first time, I saw real fear in him. The IRS has started asking questions, he said. I didn't respond. The lawsuit made everything worse. Your audit requests the bank review discovery if those records get examined properly. He stopped. What? I could lose my license. That doesn't sound like my problem. I could go to prison. That got my attention. I leaned back. What did you do? He looked down at the table. Things your father told me to do. That's not an answer. And things Danielle told me to do. My stomach tightened. How bad? He swallowed. Your sister has been hiding money for years. I said nothing. Shell companies, cash arrangements, fake vendor accounts, offshore transfers. I watched his face. And Dad. He didn't start it. That wasn't the question. Did he know? The accountant hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. When? He discovered some of it later. And he covered for her. The words hurt more than they should have. After everything, some pathetic part of me had still wanted to believe Dad was merely blinded by favoritism, that Danielle manipulated him, that he was arrogant rather than corrupt. But this was a choice. How much money? I don't know the full amount. Estimate, hundreds of thousands. How many hundreds? His eyes flicked toward mine. At least 7. I stared at him. 700,000. Probably more. He reached into his jacket. For a second, my entire body tensed. Then, He placed a small black flash drive on the table. Everything I have is there. I didn't touch it. What exactly is everything? Bank statements, wire confirmations, invoices, contracts, internal spreadsheets, some emails. Why give it to me? His mouth tightened. Because Danielle will sacrifice anyone necessary to save herself. I almost smiled. At least he understood her. And Dad, he'll protect her until protecting her becomes impossible. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. That answer surprised me. He pushed the flash drive closer. But you should trust documents. I looked at it. Years of family secrets sitting inside something smaller than my thumb. If this goes to discovery, he continued, we're all exposed. I'm cooperating because I'd rather explain what I did than let Danielle explain it for me. There it was. Not conscience. Self-preservation. For once I respected the honesty. I took the drive. That night I reviewed the files with my lawyer, through a secure copy. By midnight, neither of us was talking much. The first questionable transactions were bad. The later ones were worse. Equipment purchases for machinery that had never existed. Consulting payments to companies with no employees. Vendor invoices routed through entities connected to Danielle. One supposed warehouse lease was particularly interesting. The company had been paying thousands every month for industrial storage space. Except, there was no warehouse. The payments ultimately traced back to expenses connected to Danielle's condo in South Padre Island. I stared at the screen. She made the company pay for her condo. Essentially. My lawyer kept scrolling. Then, we found Dad's approvals. Signature after signature. Some electronic. Some handwritten. Maybe he hadn't designed the scheme, but he had helped keep it alive. By 3 a.m, the documented suspicious amount exceeded $750,000. I sat in silence. My lawyer finally asked, "Are you okay?" I laughed quietly. No. That was the first honest answer I'd given anyone in weeks. Because I suddenly understood something. Dad hadn't pushed me out because I was unnecessary. He had pushed me out because I was dangerous. I knew the systems. I questioned inconsistencies. I kept records. Danielle didn't need my position. She needed me gone. And Dad had chosen to help her. Again. The next morning, I sent my attorney formal authorization to use the evidence. My message contained one sentence. Let's get this over with. By the time we arrived at court, Carter Industrial was already bleeding. Accounts remained restricted. Vendors were demanding assurances. Several clients had begun reviewing their contracts. Rumors were spreading through the Dallas industrial community. Dad entered the courtroom looking older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders weren't as straight. His face looked gray. Mom walked beside him. Danielle wasn't there. I looked toward Aaron. Where is she? He shook his head. Dad says she's out of town on business. I almost laughed. Of course she was. Even during the biggest crisis of our family's life, Danielle had found somewhere else to be. The hearing didn't last long. My family's attorneys presented their accusations. Then mine presented the bank records, the attempted transfers, the operating agreement, the accountant supporting evidence. The judge's expression changed as the documents accumulated. What had been framed as a disgruntled daughter sabotaging her father's company began looking like something entirely different. Within an hour, their case against me was effectively collapsing. The court dismissed the central claims and ordered a broader forensic examination of the company's finances. Dad sat completely still. I watched the moment he understood what had happened. He hadn't just failed to punish me. He had invited outsiders into the books. Outside the courthouse, I heard him behind me. Evain. I stopped. He approached slowly. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. You have to believe me, he said. I waited. I didn't know how bad it was. With Danielle. He nodded. I was trying to protect her. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation. Maybe he thought there was a difference. I looked at the man whose approval I'd spent half my life chasing. How many times? His brow tightened. What? How many times did you protect Danielle at my expense? Evain. The commissions? Silence. The fake expenses. His jaw tightened. The money? I told you I didn't understand. You understood enough to hide it. He looked away. That hurt more than if he'd shouted. I stepped closer. You chose her over me. That's not fair. Every time, Dad. His eyes returned to mine. Every single time. I walked away. A week later, the company began collapsing, in earnest. Once clients heard about the forensic audit, several suspended orders. Then, the local business press picked up the story. The warehouse eventually shut down. Equipment was prepared for auction. Creditors lined up. Years of Dad's empire disappeared with astonishing speed. And Danielle, she vanished. Aaron called me one evening. They can't find her. What do you mean? She left. Where? Mexico, apparently. I sat upright. With what? We don't know. Pause. Dad thinks maybe $300,000. $300,000. After everything she'd already taken. Mom and Dad couldn't remain in their house. Aaron found them a small apartment in Arlington. He didn't ask me for money. That was exactly why I sent enough to cover 3 months of rent. Not for Dad. Not even for Mom. For Aaron. He had become collateral damage in a war he hadn't started. When he called me afterward, he sounded close to tears. You didn't have to do that. I know. Thank you. How's Mom? Humiliated. And Dad? Angry. Of course. Then, Aaron became quiet. Did you know about Danielle? Not all of it. She ruined them. I looked through my apartment window at the Dallas skyline. They let her. I know. His voice cracked. They chose her over you. Over me. Over the company. Over everything. For the first time, I heard something in Aaron that sounded like the same grief I'd carried for years. It wasn't only my betrayal anymore. The family we'd both been trying to preserve had never existed the way we'd imagined it. I signed the final document separating myself financially from Carter Industrial. Then, I left Texas. 6 weeks later, I was standing inside a modest warehouse in Oklahoma City. It wasn't impressive. The office walls needed paint. The loading dock was old. My first inventory shipment looked embarrassingly small, compared with what I'd managed in Dallas. But when I unlocked the building every morning, something felt different. It was mine. I brought 2 trusted employees from the old operation. No inflated titles. No family hierarchy. No executives who couldn't explain their own jobs. We started small. We called old industry contacts. We earned new accounts. For the first time in 15 years, I worked late because I wanted to build something, not because I was trying to earn someone's approval. 3 months later, Dad called. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Hello? His voice sounded subdued. Evaine. I waited. Your mother and I have hit a rough patch. That was one way to describe losing almost everything. Danielle cleaned us out, he continued. She's disappeared. I heard. We were wrong. I said nothing. We need your help rebuilding. I actually closed my eyes. After all of it, he still thought the solution was Evelyn fixing things. We could start again, Dad said, together. The right way this time. I still have connections throughout Texas. You understand operations. I understand the market. No. Silence. What? No, Dad. Don't be emotional. I almost laughed. I'm not. We're family. You remembered that late. His voice hardened slightly. Your mother needs medication. Insurance is complicated now. There it was. The hook. Guilt. The same tool he'd used whenever authority stopped working. I already spoke to Aaron. He's handling Mom's prescriptions through his clinic connections. You can't abandon your family. I stared across my new warehouse. Workers were unloading equipment I'd purchased without Dad's approval. Without Danielle's interference. Without anyone telling me to know my place. After everything I've done for you, Dad said. That sentence finally killed whatever guilt remained. Everything you've done for me. Evaine. I spent 15 years building your company while you handed Danielle credit money titles and forgiveness. Then you cut me out with a voicemail because I was inconvenient. I admitted we were wrong. And I'm accepting that admission. His voice softened. Then help us. No. I took a breath. You made your choice. Now, you have to live with it. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. For the first time, I didn't feel angry afterward. I felt tired. But free. I thought the story was over. Carter Industrial was dead. My parents were living in Arlington. Danielle was somewhere in Mexico, and I had finally built a life where nobody could threaten my future with a family meeting or a voicemail. Then almost 6 months later, Aaron called me before sunrise. Evain. Something in his voice made me sit up immediately. What happened? Turn on the news. I grabbed my laptop. What am I looking for? Dallas. I opened the local news page. A headline appeared near the top. A Texas businesswoman connected to a major financial fraud investigation had been arrested in Mexico and was awaiting extradition. The photograph loaded. Danielle. For several seconds, I simply stared at her face. Then Aaron said something I wasn't prepared for. They're saying investigators somehow knew exactly where to find her. I leaned back slowly. Because Aaron didn't know. Dad didn't know. Danielle certainly didn't know. But I did. The authorities hadn't gotten lucky. Someone had spent 2 months and $45,000 making sure they knew exactly where Danielle was. And that someone was me. 6 months after my father told me we were cutting ties, my sister's face was on the news. Danielle Carter had been arrested in Mexico. The first reports were vague. A former executive connected to a collapsed North Texas industrial supplier had been detained at a beachfront property and was expected to be extradited to the United States. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, financial conspiracy. The charges were still developing, but prosecutors were already talking about serious federal prison time if she was convicted. Aaron stayed on the phone while I read. Ev, I'm here. Did you know this was coming? I stared at Danielle's mugshot. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup, no designer clothes, no confident smile. For once, she looked like someone who had finally discovered that charm couldn't negotiate with consequences. I knew it was possible. Aaron went silent. He knew me too well. Evain. What? What did you do? I closed the laptop. I finished something. He exhaled, slowly. Jesus. What the news reports didn't mention was that federal investigators had received a remarkably detailed collection of evidence approximately 30 days before Danielle's arrest. Banking information, corporate records, a timeline, witness information, and most importantly, her location. That information hadn't appeared magically. After Danielle disappeared, everyone else seemed to accept that she was gone. Dad complained. Mom cried. Aaron tried to keep them functioning. I went back to work. But something bothered me. Not emotionally. Logically. Danielle had disappeared, with roughly $300,000 according to Dad. Except the numbers didn't make sense. The accountant's records suggested far more money had moved through suspicious entities over the years. Danielle hadn't suddenly become a criminal when Carter Industrial collapsed. She'd been preparing for that moment. So while my parents were mourning their fortune, I quietly hired a private investigator in Mexico City. He specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. His price made me stare at the contract. $45,000 by the time everything was finished. Expensive. But I'd spent 15 years learning something important. Good information is rarely cheap. It took him almost 2 months. Then, one Tuesday morning, an encrypted email appeared. Located. High confidence. Attached were photographs. I opened the first. Danielle was lying beside a swimming pool, overlooking the Pacific. Sunglasses. Cocktail. White linen shirt. She looked relaxed. The second photograph showed her getting into a Porsche. The third showed her entering an oceanfront condo building. According to the investigator, she was paying approximately $7,000 a month. $7,000. My parents were worrying about rent in Arlington, while Danielle was watching sunsets from an oceanfront balcony. She had also started seeing a local restaurant owner. Apparently he knew her as Jackie Stevens. I stared at that name for a long time. New country. New identity. New relationship. Sam Danielle. The investigator obtained her new phone number, alias information, and enough financial clues for me to start connecting dots with the records the accountant had already provided. That's when the real picture emerged. The $750,000 we'd initially documented, that wasn't the whole fraud. It wasn't even close. Danielle had built a network. Fake vendors billed Carter Industrial for services that never existed. Dummy corporations in Nevada and Wyoming received consulting fees. A property management company supposedly leased specialized equipment to us. Except Carter Industrial already owned that equipment. We were effectively paying Danielle to rent our own machines back to ourselves. There were marketing companies without employees, consultants without offices, invoices for projects nobody at the warehouse remembered. Money moved from Carter Industrial into one company, then another, then another. By the time I finished tracing what I could, the suspected total was approaching $1.2 million. Maybe more. I sat alone in my Oklahoma office one night, surrounded by printouts. For years, I'd wondered why Danielle had wanted my position so badly when she clearly hated operations. Now I understood. Control, not competence. She needed access. She needed Dad's trust. And eventually she needed me out of the way. I didn't confront her. I didn't call Dad. I didn't tell Aaron. Instead, I built a file. Transfer confirmation. Corporate registrations. Vendor relationships. Login records available through the investigation. Photographs confirming Danielle's location. The accountant's statements. A chronological map showing how money traveled. I made it so simple that an investigator unfamiliar with Carter Industrial could understand the basic scheme without spending months untangling it. 3 packages. One went to federal financial crime investigators. Another went to IRS criminal investigators. The third went to the relevant state financial authorities. I included contact information for witnesses, especially the accountant. He had become remarkably cooperative once prison entered the conversation. Then I waited. I expected months, maybe a year. White-collar investigations aren't television. But apparently, Danielle had attracted attention elsewhere too, or the evidence gave investigators enough to move faster than I expected. Either way, they moved. And now, she was in custody. The following afternoon, I received a call from a federal investigator. My name appeared throughout old Carter Industrial records, because I'd been operations director. They needed a statement. I gave them one. Facts only. No speeches. No revenge story. No family history unless relevant. Danielle didn't need to know who had assembled the roadmap. As far as I was concerned, the evidence belonged to the investigation now. A week later, Aaron called again. This time he sounded sick. She's trying to make a deal. Danielle. Who else? I already suspected what came next. She offered Dad. I said nothing. Her lawyer is apparently telling prosecutors Dad knew about some of the transactions. Danielle is offering documents and testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. I leaned back in my chair. Classic Danielle. Dad had protected her for years. Now she was offering him up, the moment his sacrifice became useful. How's Dad taking it? How do you think? I looked through the glass wall of my office. My employees were finishing a shipment. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was covering up missing money. Nobody had been promoted because of whose child they were. He chose her, I said. Aaron sighed. I know. Investigators were now looking closely at Dad's signatures. He might not have designed Danielle's entire scheme. But ignorance only carries you so far when your signature appears on transaction after transaction. At 68, even a relatively short prison sentence could consume years he couldn't get back. My parents' remaining assets were restricted while the investigations continued. Then Aaron asked the question I knew was coming. They may lose the apartment. I stayed quiet. Mom is terrified. I'm sorry. Another pause. Can you help? There was no accusation in his voice. That made saying no harder. I already helped once. I know. I paid 3 months because I didn't want you carrying everything. I know. But I can't keep doing this. I don't safe. I understand. And I believed him. That was the difference between Aaron and Dad. Aaron could hear no without turning it into betrayal. The old company was officially dead. The remaining assets had been liquidated. The warehouse where I'd spent 15 years was empty. The Carter Industrial name, once worth something in Texas equipment circles, was now connected to scandal. But in Oklahoma, something else was happening. My company crossed $1 million in revenue during the previous quarter. I stared at the report when my finance manager brought it into my office. Is this right? She laughed. I checked twice. 1 million. Not inherited. Not handed to me. Not built around Dad's reputation. Mine. We'd hired carefully. implemented clean systems, created clear commission structures, no relatives receiving fake consulting fees, no mystery accounts, no Danielle. The strangest part was that success felt quieter than I'd imagined. I thought crossing $1 million would feel like revenge. It didn't. It felt peaceful. One evening, I stayed late after everyone left. The warehouse lights clicked off, section by section. I sat alone with my laptop. On the screen was another article about Danielle's case. Her court-appointed attorney was reportedly negotiating with prosecutors. I wondered if she was sitting in a cell trying to figure out how everything had unraveled. Maybe she blamed the accountant, maybe Dad, maybe a client, maybe some banker who noticed the wrong transaction. She'd probably never know exactly how carefully I tracked the pieces after she disappeared. She'd never know about the investigator, the photographs, the timelines, the nights I sat alone connecting shell companies. For years, Danielle had believed she was the smartest person in every room because people kept cleaning up after her. Dad cleaned up the BMW. Mom cleaned up her mistakes. The company absorbed her inflated commissions. Other employees corrected her failures. And I kept the systems running. Danielle mistook protection for brilliance. Eventually, nobody was left to protect her. Some people would call what I did revenge. Maybe part of it was, I'd be lying if I claimed I felt nothing when I saw her arrested. But revenge wasn't the whole truth. What bothered me most was unfinished business. She had taken money, destroyed a company, left our parents with nothing, then escaped to a beach, and acted as though consequences were optional. I couldn't accept that, so I closed the loop. A few weeks later, Dad managed to reach me from another number. I almost hung up when I heard his voice. Eveline, what do you want? For once there was no command in his tone. Did you know? About what? Danielle. I waited. Did you know where she was? I looked out over my warehouse. I knew she hadn't disappeared as completely as everyone thought. His breathing changed. You did this. I didn't answer. She's my daughter. Silence. 3 words. That was all it took. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I made mistakes. You made choices. I was trying to hold the family together. No, Dad. My voice remained calm. You were trying to keep Danielle from facing consequences. You don't understand what it's like to be a parent. Maybe not. I paused. But I understand what it's like to be your daughter. Another silence. Then he said something I had wanted to hear for most of my adult life. I should have treated you differently. Years earlier, those words might have broken me. Now, they just made me sad. Yes, I said, you should have. Is there any way we can fix this? I thought about the question. Not the company. Not the money. Us. Maybe someday I could sit across from my parents without remembering every betrayal. Maybe I could call on birthdays. Maybe Christmas wouldn't always feel like a negotiation. But forgiveness and access weren't the same thing. I don't know, I said. It was the most generous answer I could give him. But we're never going into business together again. I understand. And surprisingly, I think he finally did. I hung up without blocking that number. Not because everything was forgiven, because I no longer needed the wall to feel safe. My future wasn't connected to his approval anymore. That was the freedom I'd actually been chasing. Not Danielle's arrest. Not Dad's downfall. Not the $1 million quarter. Freedom. 15 years earlier, I had entered Carter Industrial, believing loyalty meant staying. Staying through favoritism. Staying through humiliation. Staying through missed vacations and failed relationships. Staying while someone else took credit. Staying because leaving felt like betraying my family. I know better now. Sometimes loyalty means staying. Sometimes self-respect means knowing when you've stayed too long. Dad taught me one valuable lesson after all. He used to say it whenever money was involved. Business is business. For years, I thought that meant feelings had no place in decisions. Now I understand it differently. Business is business. Family is family. And when someone uses one to control the other, eventually you have to separate them. My father made his choice when he left that 7-word voicemail. Danielle made hers long before that. Aaron made his when he refused to become another weapon in the family war. And I made mine when I typed 1 word back. Understood. At the time, I thought I was acknowledging the end of my family. I wasn't. I was acknowledging the end of the version of me who would sacrifice everything just to remain useful to them. Danielle may spend years wondering who finally moved the pieces behind her back. She may never know. That's fine. I don't need her to know. I don't need Dad to admit I built half his company. I don't need Mom to finally acknowledge which daughter she protected. And I don't need anyone's permission to walk away. They thought they were cutting me out. Instead, they cut the last rope, keeping me tied to a sinking ship. And for the first time in 15 years, I built something that belonged entirely to me.